You never forget the first time a Saturn rocket lit up the Florida sky. It didn't just launch, it thundered. Even miles away, you felt it in your chest. People pulled over on highways, clambered onto rooftops, or gathered on beaches, silent for a moment. It was more than science. It was the future roaring to life right over Cape Canaveral. Long before theme parks ruled Orlando, Gatorland ruled the billboards. See the swamp giants. Touch a real gator. They were painted in loud colors with gaping jaws that dared kids to beg their parents to stop. Sometimes you'd go in, sometimes not. But those signs followed you down every road like they were just daring you to look away. Weeki Wachee mermaids were magic. They swam in a giant underwater stage, waving through glass as if it were air. Families lined up to pose next to the tank, daughters in swimsuits, dads with cigars, all squinting at the sun. The photos always came out overexposed and a little crooked, but you kept them forever. It wasn't just a roadside show. It was pure Florida charm. Every year Miami grew up, literally. New buildings stretched higher, glass sparkled brighter, traffic crawled slower. What was once a beach town turned into a skyline. From Biscayne Bay, it looked like a future city rising out of the water. Not everyone liked it, but it was hard not to stare. Miami wasn't done growing, not by a long shot. Here came the fog truck, blasting a thick cloud of mosquito spray down the street. No one worried. No one ran. In fact, kids chased it, disappearing into the white mist like it was some kind of enchanted smoke. Parents just sipped their coffee. It was Florida in the 60s. Right on cue, 3 p.m. The clouds rolled in, thunder cracked, and the skies opened up. 15 minutes of warm rain slammed your porch roof like a drumline. Then it vanished just as fast. Steam rose off the pavement. Your shoes squished, and the sun came back like nothing happened. It was nature's daily rent cycle, and Florida kids never bothered with umbrellas. Somewhere on Highway 301, a roadside stand would appear, maybe just a shack with a hand-painted sign, "Boiled Peanuts." You'd pull over, hand over a quarter, and get a paper sack dripping with briny steam. The shells were soggy, the peanuts salty soft, and somehow it all tasted like summer. It was a snack, sure, but also a rite of passage. In 1960, Daytona International Speedway opened, and you didn't hear it so much as feel it. The engines hit like a wave in your chest. NASCAR fans poured in, radios blasted, and pit crews moved like dancers. Even if you didn't care much about racing, you learned fast. In Daytona, speed was religion, and the track was the temple. Long summer days meant lizard hunts. Barefoot, shirtless, sunburned, kids chased anoles through the backyard jungle like mini Tarzans. If you caught one, you'd try to loop a string around its neck. Some kids even fed them to pet baby gators. That's right, pet gators. Florida kids weren't squeamish. And nobody asked where the lizards kept disappearing to. You'd peer through the glass-bottomed boat at Silver Springs, convinced you just saw a manatee. Or was it a log? Didn't matter. The water was impossibly clear. Turtles, fish, lost sunglasses, old tires. The boat guide had corny jokes. Before there was Mickey Mouse, there was Cypress Gardens. You walked through flowers taller than you, saw southern belles posing in pastel hoop skirts, and watched water skiers form pyramids on the lake. It was dreamy and slightly strange, like stepping into a postcard. Disney might have built the empire, but Cypress Gardens was already selling the dream. Tourists hit Clearwater Beach like ants to a picnic. They slathered on baby oil, ignored the sun warnings, and turned lobster red before noon. Locals rolled their eyes, but deep down, everyone understood that sugar white sand and neon blue water were worth the burn. If you didn't leave with a sunburn and a keychain, did you even go to Florida? Before car fresheners came in pine-scented cardboard, Florida had orange blossoms. You'd be driving with the windows down when it hit. The thick, sweet smell of citrus trees lining the road. Stronger than perfume, softer than gasoline. You couldn't bottle it. You just breathed it in and thought, this is what sunshine smells like. The sky ride at the Florida State Fair lifted you above it all. Corn dogs, cotton candy, prize pigs, and people sweating through their shirts. You swung gently in your little bucket, toes dangling, stomach flipping every time the cable dipped. For 5 minutes, you were flying. And when you came back down, it was straight to the fried dough. No seams were invisible, but they never went unnoticed. You'd be sitting on the porch, plate full of fried mullet and hush puppies, when the itch started. Tiny bites in clusters, just enough to ruin your patience. You'd swat, cuss, scratch, and keep eating anyway. Welcome to Florida, where even the bugs come hungry. Orlando before Disney was sleepy. Cattle wandered past citrus groves, and the biggest attractions were a wax museum and a reptile farm. Families passed through, not into town. Motels were mom and pop, not mouse-shaped. But ask anyone who grew up there, it was just fine the way it was. Quiet, green, and smelling faintly of orange peels. At the St. Augustine Alligator Farm, feeding time drew a crowd. A worker would hold up a whole raw chicken, wave it like bait, and fling it toward the biggest gator in the pit. You'd hear the snap from 50 feet away. The gators didn't care about manners. It was the wildest lunch show in Florida, and that's saying something. Before he was a legend, Muhammad Ali trained in Miami. Back then, he was still Cassius Clay, fast-talking, fast-moving, and impossible to ignore. Locals would sneak peeks through gym windows or line up just to watch him skip rope. You didn't know you were watching history. You just knew the room felt electric when he walked in. Even if you lived in Jacksonville, 150 miles away, you saw the rocket launches, a silent white line in the blue sky, curling ever upward. People stepped outside, pointed, and stared. It didn't matter how many times it happened, every launch was a miracle on schedule. And somehow, Florida made it feel like it was happening in your own backyard. Crossing the old 7-mile bridge felt like a gamble. It was narrow, wind-blown, and made your tires hum like a tuning fork. Kids leaned out the window. Parents gripped the wheel tighter. Boats passed under you. The ocean stretched forever, and you swore the bridge moved. But you made it, and the keys always made the nerves worth it. "Come see Tarzan Jungle Land," the radio barked between Elvis and Connie Francis. The commercials had jungle drums, animal roars, and promises of thrills. In reality, A few monkeys, some parrots, and a sweaty guy in a loincloth. But kids didn't care. It was Florida. Half the fun was in the build-up. The other half was buying a souvenir spear. Fort Lauderdale in March was chaos in a good way. Spring breakers poured in with Letterman jackets, beehive hairdos, and sunburns that matched their socks. Radios blasted Chubby Checker. Hotels ran out of towels. No one slept much. And for one wild week, a sleepy beach town turned into the teen capital of the world. Retirement communities like Century Village seemed to sprout overnight. Sprinklers going, plastic flamingos out front, and new neighbors named Herb and Betty. The lawns were neat, the golf carts clean, and suddenly you had 1,000 new grandparents living 5 miles away. Florida was changing, and fast. They were called crackers for a reason, ranchers riding horseback through Palatka fields, snapping real bullwhips to herd cattle. No cowboy hats or spurs here, just wide-brimmed straw hats, sweat-soaked shirts, and the slow gait of men who knew the land. If you heard the crack echo through the pines, you didn't forget it. That whip wasn't just for show. It meant business. Newsboys stood on hot corners with stacks of the Miami News or Tampa Tribune under their arms, shouting headlines over traffic. They had change jingling in their pockets, black smudges on their fingers, and legs that could dodge a Buick without spilling the papers. When a hurricane was coming, the whole neighborhood turned into a hive. Duct tape across windows, lawn chairs tossed into the garage, canned Spam stacked next to the flashlight. Radios played static, heavy updates. You sat in the hallway with your dog, eating Vienna sausages and hoping the roof didn't lift. And if it passed, you checked the neighbor's roof before your own. Airboats didn't just ride, they screamed. That giant fan would roar to life, and suddenly you were skimming over lily pads and gatorbacks like something out of science fiction. Flat-bottomed, loud, and utterly Floridian. If the Everglades were another planet, the airboat was your spaceship. Florida retirees had a decorating code, and it started with lawn flamingos. Maybe a pair, maybe a flock. Add a giant seashell planter or two, some pink gravel, and a sign that said, "Welcome to Paradise." It wasn't subtle, but it was home. Every block had at least one house that looked like it came from a postcard. And everyone swore theirs was the original. The orange blossom huts were impossible to miss. Bright colors, hand-painted signs, and the smell of citrus so strong it hit you from the road. You'd pull over for a cup of fresh squeezed juice so sweet it made your cheeks pucker. The locals never bought it. We had trees in our yard, but tourists? They sipped it like holy water. The Gulf breeze didn't care about your sunburn. After a day at Pensacola Beach, your shoulders stung, your nose peeled, and the salt water left a tingle you couldn't quite wash off. It hurt, sure, but in that good way, like you'd earned it. Everyone came home a little red and a little sandy, and nobody dared complain. That was summer. The VFW hosted teen dances that felt like the social event of the decade. Ceiling fans creaked overhead, Chuck Berry blared from a tinny speaker, and you did your best jitterbug with sweaty palms and polished shoes. Sometimes you danced with someone new. Sometimes you just watched from the wall. Either way, you remembered what song was playing when you worked up the nerve. Everyone had an Elvis story. The biggest one? I saw him at the Fontainebleau in '60. When he taped Sinatra's special in Miami Beach, it felt like the whole city buzzed. Maybe you didn't get in, but your cousin's friend's dad swore he peeked through the back door. It didn't matter if it was true. Just being near Elvis made you feel cooler. Packing for a road trip down US 1 meant snacks, pillows, and hoping the station wagon wouldn't overheat. You passed neon motels with kidney-shaped pools and signs that blinked vacancy. Gas was cheap, but patience wasn't. The further south you drove, the stickier the air and the louder the kids. Still, nothing beat the sight of the ocean creeping closer with every mile. 10 cents got you an RC Cola from the vending machine, the kind where you had to yank the glass bottle sideways out of a metal loop. It clinked, hissed, and went down cold. Some said it beat Coke. Some didn't care. Miami Beach hotel pools were a scene. Bathing suit contests, blaring music, and judges in sunglasses pretending to be serious. Girls strutted poolside while tourists pretended not to gawk. Even if you didn't care who won, you stayed to watch. Some cheered, some rolled their eyes. But nobody walked away dry, especially if you were near the splash zone. You didn't need to read the paper to know change was coming. You could see it right there at Woolworths. Young people sitting quietly at the lunch counter, facing down hatred with calm resolve. Even as a kid, you felt the tension. You didn't understand all of it, but you felt it. Florida was part of the story, too. High school football games packed the stands every Friday night. It didn't matter if you liked sports, everyone went. The marching band squeaked through halftime, the concession stand sold Cokes and popcorn, and the cheerleaders shook their pom-poms like it was Broadway. Rivalries ran deep. Fights sometimes broke out, but win or lose, the whole town showed up. That was tradition. Every gas station had a basket of Gator souvenirs, key chains, coin purses, even little taxidermied heads with their mouths frozen open. They smelled like lacquer and trouble. Tourists couldn't resist. Locals rolled their eyes. But you always knew who'd just gotten back from a road trip. They were the ones showing off their new Alligator wallet like it was a Rolex. "Where can I see real alligators?" tourists asked, and locals snorted. "Try your backyard," someone always said. Truth was, they were everywhere. Lakes, canals, even golf course ponds. If you lived here, you knew to glance before dipping a toe. But out-of-staters? They acted like gators were circus animals until they met one. Then suddenly, they respected the water. Skipper Chuck was a legend in South Florida TV. Every kid knew the boat wheel, the puppets, and that cheesy dock set. You wanted your birthday shout-out, or maybe even to be in the live audience. It felt like he knew your name. You'd hum the theme song in the bath and practice salutes in the mirror. A local celebrity, no question. After 1959, Cuban bakeries started popping up like mushrooms in Miami. The smells alone, warm guava, toasty Cuban bread, fresh cafecito, could pull you off the sidewalk. You'd leave with pastelitos in a greasy paper bag, powdered sugar everywhere. Some didn't speak English. Didn't matter. Good food doesn't need translation. and after one bite, you knew you'd be back. Panhandle winters weren't snowstorms, but they sure weren't sunshine either. Fog rolled in thick, making pine trees look like ghosts. You'd scrape frost off the windshield with a spatula and wish you'd worn thicker socks. It wasn't the deep South, and it wasn't Florida beach weather. It was something in between. Before central AC, movie theaters had swamp coolers, big clunky boxes that hummed and dripped and barely kept up with the heat. The floor stuck to your shoes, the seats were cracked vinyl, and the popcorn came with more salt than butter. But it was dark and cool enough to survive the afternoon. The movie almost didn't matter. When NASA announced the astronauts drank Tang, every grocery store had a Tang booth. Little paper cups, weird orange fizz. It was powdery, sweet, and futuristic. If astronauts drank it, you did too. Mom stocked up. Kids pretended they were floating in space. It wasn't great, but it was space age. And that counted for something in the 1960s. Florida springs were shockingly cold, even in August. Kids dared each other to jump in, screamed from the chill, then claimed it wasn't bad. You could see straight to the bottom, every fish, rock, and stray penny someone tossed in. You'd swim until your fingers pruned, then dry off on hot limestone and swear you were brave enough to do it again. Every fall, snowbirds started trickling back. You could tell by the license plates, the fancier hats, and the way they asked, "So, is it always this humid?" The diners got crowded again. Shuffleboard courts filled up. And just like that, Florida changed gears. Locals rolled their eyes. But deep down, they knew winter had officially arrived. The birds were back. Saturday night wasn't complete without Jackie Gleason booming, and away we go. From your TV set, live from the Miami Beach Auditorium, it felt like he was right down the street. Families gathered, bowls of popcorn in their laps, and laughed until bedtime. Gleason was loud, brash, and hilarious, and somehow made South Florida feel like the center of the country. Flea markets sold flip-flops made from recycled tires, thick, rugged, and basically indestructible. They left black marks on your floors and smelled like a garage, but they lasted forever. You wore them fishing, to the store, even church if you were bold. They weren't stylish, but in Florida, they just made sense. Hot pavement didn't stand a chance. Miami Beach motels were a mid-century dream. Starburst signs blinked in pastel neon. Pools were kidney-shaped and lined with turquoise tiles. Tiki torches flickered near the shuffleboard court. Tourists snapped Polaroids under palm trees, dreaming they'd found paradise. And for a night or two maybe they had. Before checkout came and the AC dripped on your suitcase. Fireworks? You didn't go to a store. You went to the guy in a pickup on the side of the road. He had Roman candles, bottle rockets, and M80s wrapped in paper bags. Cash only. No questions. The whole deal felt half legal, half local tradition. If you blew your eyebrows off, that was just part of the 4th of July fun. Shuffleboard wasn't just for retirees. On St. Pete shuffle nights, grandparents came alive, sliding discs with perfect aim, chatting under string lights, and sipping iced tea like it was champagne. You sat on the benches eating orange sherbet, waiting for your turn. The courts felt like Florida's version of a dance floor, except the only thing getting dipped was the puck. You boarded the Greyhound in your Sunday shirt, a sack lunch in hand, headed north to Tallahassee. Your cousin had just started at FSU, and it felt like visiting royalty. You'd stare out the window for hours, pine trees, gas stations, endless road, until the big red bricks of campus finally appeared. Then it was hugs, cafeteria food, and whispered college secrets. Someone dared you to try it, fried gator tail dipped in cocktail sauce. The texture was chewy, the flavor somewhere between fish and chicken, but the real thrill came from saying you'd eaten an alligator. You grinned through the first bite like a champ. It was Florida on a plate, crispy, wild, and proudly strange. You weren't scared. You went back for seconds. At Sunken Gardens, you wandered through tropical flowers and flamingos that looked too pink to be real. Giant koi swirled below lily pads, and fish with names like Oscar stared up at you through glassy water. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like a lost world tucked between strip malls, a little jungle where nothing ever hurried and everything shimmered in Florida sun. The moon landing wasn't just something you watched. It was something you felt. Huddled around a tiny black and white TV with foil-wrapped antennae, your whole family held its breath as Neil stepped off the ladder. Static buzzed. The room was quiet. And somewhere beyond the crackle, a Florida kid whispered, "That's our sky." You never looked at Cape Canaveral the same again. Pulling into a gas station wasn't just about fuel. A man in a crisp uniform wiped your windshield, checked your oil, and smiled while the pump clicked. It all felt polite, dependable, like the car knew it was getting a proper checkup. Shell City wasn't really a city, but it felt like one when you were 10. Rows of shark teeth, tiny bottles of sand, and seashells shaped into flamingos. You'd stop on the way to the beach, nose pressed to the glass, begging for just one souvenir. It was kitschy, it was corny, and it was the highlight of every highway drive. You didn't need fancy gear to fish, just a chunk of chicken liver, a rusted hook, and a quiet wooden pier. The salt air stung your eyes, and the sun toasted your shoulders. Sometimes you caught something. Most times you didn't. But sitting next to your uncle, legs swinging over the edge, you felt like a real Floridian. Patient, barefoot, and home. Every now and then, the radio would go quiet, and that flat voice would cut in. "This is a test of the emergency broadcast system." And for those 5 seconds, the whole house froze. No one knew why it made your stomach clench. Maybe because it felt like something could happen. But when it didn't, you exhaled and turned the volume back up. You'd dig through piles of seaweed on Daytona Beach looking for treasure. Tiny crabs, bits of coral, sand dollars that always broke on the way home. You stuffed your finds into a leaky bucket, feet burning on hot sand, hair stuck to your forehead. By the end of the day, you were coated in salt and pride. Your own little beachcomber's haul. Along US 19 stood an 18-foot pink Stegosaurus, sun-faded and absurd. At Dinosaur Wildlife in Spring Hill, It lured families like a siren. You'd pose beside it, half laughing, half convinced it could come to life. Inside, taxidermied beasts and fake volcanoes. Outside, souvenir keychains and gator jerky. It wasn't science. It was spectacle. And you loved every wild, weird second of it. When Lion Country Safari opened, it was a new kind of zoo. You were in the cage. You'd roll up the windows as baboons clambered over the car, shrieking and smearing paw prints across the windshield. The giraffes ignored you. The zebras blocked traffic, and everyone screamed when the lion yawned. No matter how carefully you packed, sand got everywhere. It hid in your flip-flops, coated your towel, and somehow ended up inside your sandwich. You'd shake it off and laugh, spitting out grit between bites. That's how you knew you'd had a good day. Florida didn't let you leave clean, but it always let you leave smiling. Boys had crew cuts that stuck straight up like bristles. Girls carried rat combs with long handles and teased their hair into clouds. You saw them at dances, skating rinks, soda fountains. Everyone wanted to look older than they were, but under the gel and aqua net, they were still kids, sneaking glances, passing notes, and wondering what kissing was really like. When the dirt roads flooded, you didn't wait it out. You used a fan boat. In parts of rural Florida, it wasn't a stunt. It was just how you got to school. The roar echoed through cypress trees. The spray soaked your pant cuffs. And you held tight to your lunch. You arrived soaked, muddy, and grinning like it was a theme park ride. The town's first automatic car wash looked like something from the Jetsons. Bright metal arms, buzzing nozzles, and swirling soap foam that made your car disappear. You sat wide-eyed in the back seat, gripping the armrest as brushes thudded against the windows. When it was over, the car was wet. The windows were streaky, and you begged to go through again. Going to Sears downtown meant dressing up. Sunday shoes, slicked hair, maybe even a bow tie. You'd ride the escalator like it was an amusement park, then trail behind your mom as she compared prices. The popcorn smelled better than any perfume. You might get a toy, you might not. But that elevator ding and brass handrail felt like luxury. After a hard freeze, orange crates bobbed in the canals like lost boats. You'd hear the grown-ups worry about harvests, about money, about groves that might not bounce back. But to you, it was strange and magical. The fruit glowed in the cold morning light, floating in silence. Even Florida, it seemed, had its off days. One July afternoon, someone dared you to fry an egg on the sidewalk. So you cracked it right there on the driveway. It sizzled, kind of. Not quite like on TV, but that didn't stop you from declaring it cooked. You poked it with a stick, called it science, and added chef to your list of summer accomplishments. Your dad snapped Polaroids of pelicans balancing on dock posts, their beaks crooked like question marks. You'd name them Big Bill, Flappy, the Professor. The sun turned the bay gold, the air smelled like salt, and everything felt calm. Later, when the photo dried, it was slightly overexposed and blurry, but perfect. That pelican was part of the family now. Fire ants swarmed your ankles, chiggers left mystery bites, and sticker burrs clung to your socks like Velcro. You didn't complain. You kicked them off, scratched until your mom scolded you, and went back outside anyway. Florida didn't give you a free pass. It toughened you up. If you wanted adventure, you had to earn it through welts and itches. The Miami Seaquarium wasn't fancy yet, but you had a pass. You knew where the Dolphins spun, where the Shark Tank made people squeal, and which shows had splash zones. You'd press your face to the glass until your breath fogged it. Every visit felt like stepping behind the scenes of your favorite sea show. And every time, you stayed too long. Out west, near Okeechobee, cattle drives still happened. Dust rose in clouds, cowhands in wide-brimmed hats shouted commands, and herds moved like slow rivers. You'd pull off the road to watch, the air buzzing with heat and history. It wasn't a rodeo. It was real life. And for a few minutes, you saw the old Florida still moving forward. Suddenly, every house going up was made of concrete blocks. They weren't pretty, but they were hurricane safe. That's what the builders said. You watched entire neighborhoods rise in weeks. New streets, new families, new start. Some folks missed the wooden porches, but others looked at that sturdy gray wall and felt relief. It wouldn't bend. It wouldn't break. It was Florida-proof. Construction crews rolled through your neighborhood with bulldozers and cones. I-95 was coming, and nothing would stop it. You watched as trees vanished and homes were marked with orange paint. Some friends moved. Some stayed and complained about the noise. But the road came anyway, wide, loud, and permanent. And just like that, your little street connected to the whole country. Right before the sun dipped below the Gulf, the whole sky turned syrupy gold. You'd pause whatever you were doing, riding your bike, finishing your sandwich, and just stare. The water shimmered like melted copper, the breeze cooled off, and everything slowed down. You didn't need a photo. To reach the good fishing hole, you had to wade through mangroves, ankle-deep water, roots like tripwires, and mosquitoes waiting in ambush. You held your rod above your head like a sword and moved slow. When you finally made it to that shady, quiet spot, it felt like a secret. You didn't always catch anything, but you always felt like you belonged. You weren't old enough for bikinis or baby oil, but you still laid out on the driveway in a folding aluminum chair, arms behind your head, pretending to tan. You'd shift every 5 minutes like a rotisserie chicken. By dinner time, your nose was pink, your legs had chair imprints, and you declared yourself sun-kissed. That was the Florida version of glamorous. When mosquitoes swarmed, you didn't run inside. You waved a towel, slapped your arms, and hoped for a breeze. Bug spray smelled awful, citronella never worked, and screen doors were always a little torn. You got bit. You scratched. You moved on. That's just how Florida summers worked, itchy, sweaty, and full of lessons in patience. At the back of the grocery store, behind the butcher and the pickle barrel, was a big glass tank full of live fish, catfish, maybe carp, swimming in slow circles like they knew what was coming. You'd press your face to the glass, fingers leaving smudges. Mom pretended not to notice. It wasn't a pet store, but it sure felt like one. Your first Cuban sandwich came wrapped in wax paper, hot enough to burn your fingertips. Roast pork, ham, Swiss, pickles, mustard, pressed flat until the bread crackled. A little toothpick stuck through the middle like a flag. One bite in, and you didn't care about peanut butter and jelly anymore. That sandwich ruined you, in the best way. Nothing else tasted quite as alive. The town was so flat, the water tower looked like a skyscraper. You could see it from every street, painted white or pale blue, with the town name in blocky letters. It doubled as a landmark and a promise. "Turn left at the tower," someone would say, and somehow everyone always knew what that meant. When the Miami Dolphins joined the NFL in 1966, you begged for a hat. It was teal, with a dolphin jumping through a flaming hoop, or at least that's how it looked to you. You wore it crooked, proud, and clueless about football. It didn't matter. You had a Florida team now, and that meant Sundays just got a whole lot louder. Water moccasins weren't mythical. You saw them. Fat, dark snakes curled on riverbanks, sunning themselves like they owned the place. You'd freeze, point, and whisper cottonmouth, like it was a curse. Some kids threw rocks, some turned and ran, but no one forgot. In Florida, the wildlife didn't just stay in books. It stared back at you. The Florida Citrus Tower in Claremont looked like it touched the clouds. You'd ride the elevator up, ears popping, and press your forehead to the glass. Orange groves stretched in every direction, miles and miles of green and gold. It felt endless. You didn't know Florida would change, but from up there, it looked like it never would. Orange groves weren't just crops, they were playgrounds. You'd weave between the trees, climb branches, and hurl half-rotten fruit at your friends like grenades. The air was thick with that sweet, sharp smell, and bees hummed like background musics. You came home sticky, scratched, and victorious. Jungle gyms had nothing on Florida's orchards. At a bait shack near the lake, a vending machine stood humming. You dropped in 2 quarters, and out popped a little cup of live worms. Squirming, damp, ready for action. It was gross. It was genius. You felt like a real angler. Fishing in Florida didn't just start at the water. It started at the vending machine. Near a man-made lake in Orlando, the geese didn't just honk. They charged. 1 minute you were feeding bread, the next you were running, arms flailing, chased by a bird with anger issues. It became a local legend. You didn't go back for a while. But when you did, you brought backup, and extra bread, and running shoes. Frozen orange juice on a stick sounded better than it tasted, but that first one was magic. Ice cold, bright orange, wrapped in thin plastic that stuck to your fingers. You bit too hard, got brain freeze, and swore you'd go slower next time. You never did. It was sweet, messy Florida sunshine on a stick, and you loved it. Mullet fishing under the full moon wasn't a quiet affair. Barefoot on wet docks, grown men yelling directions, nets flying through the air like spider webs. The water shimmered, the air buzzed, and someone always fell in. You didn't care about the smell. You were part of something old, loud and wild, and it felt like Florida. Flipper wasn't just a TV show. It was an obsession. You watched the dolphin leap, chirp, and save the day every week. And when the credits rolled, you begged your parents to take you to the real lagoon at Key Biscayne. The water looked bluer, the sky wider, and you just knew Flipper was still out there waiting to say hello. Riding the school bus in September meant two things: sticky vinyl seats and no air conditioning. You'd peel your legs off the bench like melted cheese and pray for a breeze through the cracked windows. By the time you got to school, your shirt was damp, your hair was frizzed, and you already wanted to go home. You started with an empty bucket and a dream. By the end of the day, it was overflowing with shells, spirals, fans, broken bits that still felt special. The bucket got heavier with each tide. Then one day, the handle cracked and spilled your treasure. You cried, then you laughed, and started collecting all over again. Swimming in Florida Springs felt like entering another world. The water was so clear, your fingers looked unreal. Fish glided past like they owned the place. You'd float on your back, watching sunlight ripple through oak branches. It was cold, still, perfect. Pools were fine. But the springs? That was magic in its purest form. The local sheriff had a big hat, a slow drawl, and a face that looked like it hadn't smiled since 1948. He waved at parades, drank black coffee at the diner, and knew everybody's business. He wasn't scary, but you didn't want to test him. He was Florida's version of Mayberry, with just a little more humidity and a lot more gators. No one locked their doors unless a hurricane was coming. Neighbors wandered in to borrow sugar, drop off pie, or just say hi. You'd hear the screen door creak and know who it was by the footsteps. It wasn't naive. It was normal. Trust came standard in Florida, at least until the wind picked up. On cool mornings, you'd sneak out barefoot to pick grapefruit from the backyard tree. Your fingers stuck with juice. Your toes went numb in the dew, and you felt like a pioneer. You didn't always eat them. Sometimes they were too sour. But you picked them, and that counted for something. Breakfast just hit different in Florida. You built castles with towers, bridges, and moats. Sand caked under your nails, dripped down your arms, and somehow ended up behind your ears. Strangers walked by and nodded in admiration. One even took a photo. You felt like royalty, ankle-deep in seawater, defending your sandy kingdom against the rising tide. For 10 minutes, you ruled the beach. The Baton girls marched down Main Street, twirling silver sticks in high boots and shiny uniforms. But Florida's humidity had other plans. The twirling slowed, the hair flattened, and a few girls wiped out on slick pavement. No one laughed, at least not loudly. Everyone clapped anyway. That's just how Florida parades went. Sticky, loud, and gloriously imperfect. Your friend moved to California chasing dreams and dry weather, but their postcard said it all. It's nice here, but it ain't Florida. And they were right. No gator ponds, no citrus groves, no lightning storms that disappeared in 20 minutes. Just palm trees that didn't bend quite the same. Some things you can't replace. Florida stays with you,